USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Game of the Week podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. An in-depth look at this week's top college hockey matchup and a preview of the other big games.
Welcome to the Game of the Week podcast for Thursday, March 4th, 2021. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. A big matchup in Big Ten this weekend, a pair of games at Minnesota as the Michigan Wolverines travel in to take on the Golden Gophers.
And joining us now to preview the game of the week between Minnesota and Michigan is the Big Ten reporter for the Rink Live. He's based out of the Twin Cities, sees a lot of these Gophers. That's Jess Myers, good friend of the show. Jess, welcome in. Good season thus far for the Gophers with the chance to maybe put a trophy in the case this weekend. That's probably going to be a pretty nice accomplishment.
Bob Motzko pointed it out when we talked to him this week. He said it's banner season. This is the time, the next 5-6 weeks, where you've got a chance to hang 4 banners. First one is this weekend, of course, with the Big Ten title on the line. And it's everything's goofy this year. I mean, this covering Hockey East, where they're not actually going to reward or award a regular season champion, but the Big Ten is going by winning percentage now because the schedules are imbalanced because, we've had a few cancellations. So there's 100 mathematical scenarios out there. And what I really liked talking to Bob Motzko this week is he simplified it. He said, you know what? We have to win Friday night. That's the bottom line. We don't do that. None of the other stuff matters. We have to win our game Friday night. That's all our focus is. So, just kind of throw out the math and go play hockey. And that's, I think, the only strategy you can have right now.
I want to just kind of look at this season in general and what it's been like for the Gophers. I think that if my math is right, they came out 10-0. Am I doing that math right? Yeah, 10-0 out of the gate. Then a couple of losses, then some more wins in a row, then a couple of losses, and then it's been 4 in a row since dropping a couple to Wisconsin. So there's only been really 2 hiccups to this entire season. They've either swept or been swept. I guess there was a Wisconsin loss earlier this season. That's the one that I maybe left out. But this has been a team that has been pretty consistent in a league where I look at consistency as kind of the most valued commodity. Not many teams have consistently been able to win. Is that what makes this Minnesota team one of the better clubs, their consistency?
Their consistency has been one thing. The other thing that they've really had going for them since day one is depth. I can't think of a time where Bob Motzko has shortened his bench this season. I mean, they've absolutely rolled 4 lines throughout. There's not really that one big, Cole Caulfield, Wisconsin style line that you can shut down, or at least you can try to shut down. Nobody's figured out how to do that with Wisconsin yet, which is why they're going into this final weekend, contending for the Big Ten title. But, you really see balance, you really see depth, and a lot of experience. A year ago, we were talking about the 12 newcomers on the Gophers roster. Well, this year they've got 3 or 4, and only a couple of them are playing a regular role for the Gophers this year. So they're a deep, experienced team. And then the other thing that has really been a factor that maybe you might not have expected watching them a year ago is starting at about Christmas time a year ago, Jack LaFontaine just flipped a switch and has been, the every night goalie for this team. After kind of an uneven start to his time with the Gophers, he's been rock solid in goal. So as we all know, at every level of hockey, that makes such a difference when you've got a goalie that your team has confidence in and that you can rely on.
You mentioned LaFontaine, and I think I had said this to somebody before the season that I thought this was an offense that could just roll and that this was going to be a team that would be led by the offense. And while LaFontaine has been excellent in net, how much has the defense in front of him improved? Because it doesn't feel like this team is giving up the blatant grade A's that they sometimes were, especially last season.
Yeah, I mean, you can't talk enough about this defense and the talent they have. When you look at, Ryan Johnson, who's a first-round draft pick, who has been rock solid defensively, still hasn't gotten his first collegiate goal, but, he's been outstanding. Brock Faber, who's a freshman, he's a second-round pick of the Kings. He was Mr. Everything for the USA National Team Development Program. And talking to Seth Appert, who was his coach there for 2 years, he said, literally, there was no better defensive defenseman, shutdown defenseman in the world at his age than Brock Faber. And, he's been a really nice addition. Then you have guys like Jackson Lacombe, another second round draft pick. He was a forward until about 3 years ago, and you really see those offensive tendencies with the way he carries the puck. So it's a really nice combination of guys who, stick to their defensive responsibilities and guys who get to the red line with the puck and they're looking to make a play. They're not looking to dump it in. So that's been very reliable as well. And again, they're playing with that extra boost of confidence you have that, hey, if I cough one up here, if I make a mistake, Jack LaFontaine more likely than not is going to bail me out. And that allows you to do so much more as a defensive unit.
Probably the only real blip in the whole schedule this season for Minnesota was that February 5th and 6th weekend, 4-1 and 8-1 losses at home to Wisconsin. And I think after that, Bob Motzko said something about trying to get things back on an even keel. What was wrong with the Gophers that weekend, and what have they corrected since?
What's funny about that is Bob Motzko has said that every season you have one weekend that you just you throw it in the trash. You don't learn anything from it. You don't talk about it. You don't look at the tape, anything like that. And they had already had that weekend at that point in the year. They had the 2 home losses to Notre Dame, a couple of 1-goal losses, and it seems like these teams always play 1-goal games. So that's kind of what we expected. That was the weekend they forgot about. So they completely lay an egg, especially in the Saturday night game against Wisconsin. It's you look up and it's 2-0 5 minutes in, and one of those games where things seem to snowball on them. And after that game, I asked Bob Motzko, do you throw this one in the trash? Do you forget about this one? And he was pretty adamant. He said, no, we're going to wear this one. We're going to remember this one. We're going to wear this one around our necks. And he admitted a couple days later, their Monday practice, he holds a job that Herb Brooks used to have. There was a lot of him standing at the red line, blowing the whistle, saying again in that practice. And they learned from it. And they came out and since then have won 4 straight games and have looked pretty good in doing so. So maybe that was the lesson from that weekend, was that, you've got to show up every night, and especially against a team like Wisconsin, which has so many weapons and can play so well in goal at times that, you have to give it your all every weekend, and that was one that they learned from.
I think I saw this week that Motzko pointed to the power plays, an area where the Golden Gophers need to step up a little bit. What's the story on special teams?
1 of 13 on their last 13 power plays, and he admitted that's not good enough. And it's one of those deals where they've gotten looks, they've moved the puck pretty well. He wants to see them be a little more crisp, and he admitted that's something that they're working on in what he calls kind of the final touches that you like to put on your team at this point in the season.
It's been since early December that Minnesota has seen Michigan, and that seems like forever ago. And especially with a young team like Michigan, they may be very different. What can you tell us about the opponent for the Gophers, the Wolverines, this weekend, especially with those 4 freshmen up front who are just doing a terrific job?
I said, isn't it perfectly fitting that a generation ago, the University of Michigan gave us the Fab Five, where they had 5 freshman starters on a basketball team that went to the national championship game. And here we are with kind of history repeating itself, except on the hockey rink. They're so good and so young. And yes, the Gophers swept a series in Ann Arbor back in December, but it was really kind of a false representation of both teams. Michigan had 4 forwards that were gone at World Juniors. Minnesota was playing without Brandon McManus, who was one of their top forwards. He was a senior. And they had 3 of those good young defensemen missing at World Juniors. So it was kind of one of those weird weekends where, you didn't get a real representation of what these two teams are. The other thing about Michigan that I think has to scare you is Strauss-Mann, and he hasn't had the year this year as a junior that he had as a sophomore when he was the Big Ten's top goalie. But he is one of those shutdown goalies that can just, get into a rhythm and keep everything off the board. So those are kind of the 2 factors with Michigan is their young talent and their goaltending.
You mentioned Strauss-Mann, Mann versus LaFontaine. Do we see a goalie duel, or do we see the offensive skills of both these teams explode?
Well, I will say this, and again, that series in Ann Arbor back in December, Jack LaFontaine gave up 1 goal on the weekend, and he shut out Michigan in what will certainly be his final game at Yost Ice Arena, a place where he started his career and then transferred after 2 years. And after that game, he was as emotional as I've ever seen him. I mean, he talked about just, leaving Ann Arbor, not knowing if he'd play college hockey again. So if you want any kind of incentive for a goalie, I think it's there. But I don't see shutouts this weekend. I see these two teams with all the offense they have, potentially scoring a lot of goals.
Before I let you go, Jess, you get to spend a lot of time around Bob Motzko, and he's in obviously a great job right now, a little different job than he was at St. Cloud State, more exposure, and I'm sure that has to impact a coach. But have you seen him change since he's first taken the job to where he is today, personally as a coach? Has he somehow evolved a little bit?
I think he's the same guy, generally speaking. He's in a much bigger pond now. You can kind of fade into the background in the Twin Cities a little bit more than you could in a town the size of St. Cloud, where Husky hockey is the biggest thing on campus and the biggest thing in central Minnesota. But the one thing I'll say about him, he likes his time away from the rink as well. He's very private with matters of his family. He's got one son playing in the NAHL right now. He's got another son playing high school hockey in Minnesota, and he doesn't talk about them much. And the other thing is, he values his family time, and, he likes to get out to the rink and watch his kids play. So I think he's really enjoying the job from that standpoint. It's a considerable jump up in pay. It's a considerable jump up in pressure. It's a considerable jump up in the attention paid to his program. But, hey, he knows why he's here. He knows why they brought him in. He knows for all the banners that Don Lucia hung, that wasn't enough for this program by the end of Lucia's reign here, and he knows the job he's got to do as well.
Well, it will be two veteran bench bosses going at it when Minnesota and Michigan face each other, though both of them pretty young in terms of how much time they've spent at their respective schools. So I look forward to this weekend series. And Jess Myers, we always appreciate your time. Hopefully we see you in Pittsburgh at a Frozen Four. I would hope that's maybe on your radar screen.
I was looking at flights last night, so planning on being there. Hopefully my 28th Frozen Four, if things work out the way I plan.
Wouldn't make sense if you weren't there. Jess Myers from the Rink Live, thanks so much for your time. Enjoy the weekend.
Always great to talk to you guys.
More of the Game of the Week podcast coming right up.
This is the USCHO Game of the Week podcast from US College Hockey Online.
This is the Game of the Week podcast from USCHO.com. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. Big matchup in the Big Ten we just talked about with Jess Myers, number 3 Minnesota, hosting number 7 Michigan. This one, in some ways, would seem like it would be easy to predict, but the problem is you don't know which factors are going to weigh in heaviest. Is it going to be Strauss-Mann and Jack LaFontaine? Is it going to be the potent offenses on each team? Is one going to do better in one category than the other? This one is one with maybe some surprises in store, but should be some great hockey.
Yeah, and you look at the other side of this where you have Wisconsin and Michigan State, the Wisconsin and Minnesota still in this race for first place. If you're Minnesota, you have to sit there and assume that Wisconsin will get all 6 points that they can against Michigan State. So now you're the Gophers. You're thinking about winning that first game, and if you have to get an extra point, I think my math, and I know Jess kind of alluded at it, my math has it that if Minnesota were to get 3 points at any point in this weekend, they'll be okay. They'll win the regular season title. I'm not totally positive on that. I'm not a math major, but that's the way I look at it. So as he said in the message from Bob Motzko, pretty clear, win on Friday night. Win on Friday night, take care of business. I think Minnesota has to look at it. They have to be the team that takes care of business. You can't rely on Wisconsin faltering. Right now, it just doesn't feel as likely as scenario. So I think if you're the Gophers, you got to take care of business, but there's a team that really wants victories standing in your way.
And Michigan, they probably are in the NCAA tournament, but a couple losses there, a loss in the Big Ten tournament may put them in a little bit of peril. I'm sure Mel Pearson has his eyes on the NCAAs as well as the Big Ten.
I totally agree. I mean, you talk about the fact if Michigan were to get swept this weekend, they'd be 13-10-1 overall. And then you throw in maybe one loss in the Big Ten tournament, 13-11-1. Despite the fact we know this is a good team, they've had a good season, maybe a little inconsistent at times, but this has been a very good team with a lot of talent. We don't have a pairwise to fall back on and say, oh, yeah, you qualify because of how well you did in this category. No, you're going to have to kind of convince people. And does 13, 11, and 1 sound that good to a committee? That's a big question that could come up. So if you're Mel Pearson, you know that you need victories.
Meanwhile, you mentioned Wisconsin, a pair of games at Michigan State. Tony Granato's squad has been probably the best team or one of the best 2 or 3 teams since the semester break. A sweep at Michigan State and a faltering by Minnesota. They end up being the Big Ten champs and even more cementing their path to the NCAA tournament, perhaps even as a top seed.
Yeah, listen, I'd have them in the tournament. Even if they were to lose 3 more games, finishing at 17, 11, and 1, that's more than enough, I think, especially playing in a tough Big Ten conference. But I expect them to be a team that can get to 20 wins. There's not going to be a lot of teams in this country this year that are going to get to 20 wins. So I think that should further cement things. But you're right. Now, if you're talking about an NCAA picture, what you're fighting for right now as the Badgers is maybe could you win the Big Ten and maybe earn the number 1 overall seed, or at least a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament.
Well, let's turn to Hockey East, where things look like they're coming down to BU and BC. Number 18 Northeastern is at number 2 BC, while BU at number 10 in this week's poll is at UMass Lowell. What's shaking out with those 2 contests?
Well, if you read my Hockey East column this week, you'll see that I'm not that thrilled with the fact that there is no regular season champion that's going to be crowned in Hockey East. Whatever. I'm going to put that aside. They're still fighting for the number 1 overall seed, and that will carry with it home ice for the playoffs as long as you stay alive. So from what I understand, and don't forget, we have the Hockey East Power Index, which is a mathematical system very similar to what the old pairwise was. I am told that if Boston College loses in regulation, and that would be against Northeastern, and if Boston University wins in regulation against UMass Lowell, they will have an identical Hockey East Power Index total at the end of the regular season, and they would be kind of tied for first place if that were the case. From there, the next tiebreaker, I am told, is that your opponents combined Hockey East Power Index. So every game you've played against an opponent, add that in once for each game you played, divide it by the number of games played, you get a number. That can't even be figured out until after all of the games are played this weekend. If that's still tied, then it becomes your opponent's opponents. I can't even do that math. The math has gotten so complicated in Hockey East, unfortunately. So it looks like BC is in the catbird seat. They are in really good position. They just need to get any point, an overtime loss, an overtime win, a regulation win, shootout, whatever you want. Get a point, and they should be clinching the regular season title, from what I am told about the Hockey East math.
And then in third place, it looks like they are going to be cemented there, from what we understand. Number 6 UMass has a game against Maine. Doesn't affect Hockey East standings, but that's an important game for UMass to take control of.
Yeah, from what I understand, it might not be 100% on this, but I think that UMass cannot get up to 2. If they can, it would have to be they winning in regulation, Boston University losing in regulation. So I think that they are cemented into third place. I think they're an NCAA team, a lock. I don't think that that's a big issue there. So I'm not too concerned about UMass. I think this is just one of those games you want to play well so that you have some momentum going into the postseason.
As much as everybody misses the pairwise for the NCAAs, nobody is going to want to see math ever again, whether it's point percentages or mysterious power indexes. Let's go back to normal next year, please.
Oh, I used to think of myself as a great, math mind. I did very well on my math SAT. I can't do all of the math that's involved in this, at least not quickly. And that's usually how you're trying to think of it. You're on air or something like that, and you're trying to figure out, can this team pass that team? And if you haven't done the math ahead of time and way ahead of time, you're not going to do any of this math quickly. 2
interesting matchups this weekend, single games in the NCHC. Number 12 Omaha is at number 1 North Dakota. These have been emotional battles. North Dakota's had the better of all but one game. This should be very interesting because there's really nothing on the line except pride in this one.
Maybe for Omaha, it's an NCAA berth. That is the one thing that I think if you would have beat North Dakota in this final game of the regular season, you'd probably lock up the NCAA tournament for Omaha. A lot of people, as I've kind of looked at people prognosticating how the field is going to be selected, they still have them as a bubble team. I personally have them as one of my locks. But if you're going to have to make a case, here's a great time to make it. You're going to have to play a team that you've played, 6 times. This will be the 6th time they'll play in the last 4 weeks. And that's a tall task when it's the number 1 team in the country. So they've gotten 1 win out of this. There's 4 losses to go along with it. Some really close, some not so close. I think this is one of those games where you can, if you're the committee and you're looking at the way this team has been down the stretch with such a tough schedule, you get a lot of credit if you can, beat North Dakota in Grand Forks this weekend.
Then you have number 9 Minnesota Duluth at number 8 St. Cloud, a single game. Both teams will have played the same number of games. 1 point separates St. Cloud from Minnesota Duluth. A win by either one of them locks up second place in the NCHC and probably has some NCAA implications as well.
Yeah, I have these teams as NCAA locks right now. I do say, you can look at Minnesota Duluth. If they can win it in regulation, then we know that they will get the second spot in the tournament. If they win it in overtime, then they end up tied, and then you go to the head-to-head, and they're tied there. I don't know where the next tiebreaker is in this kind of crazy year. So we haven't even, again, too much math for my mind. So I'm not sure what happens. But you can definitively say if St. Cloud State can win the game, whether it's in regulation or overtime, they lock up the number 2 seed. Minnesota Duluth wins it in regulation, they win it. They lock up the number 2 seed. If Duluth wins in overtime, let's get calculators out. I'm not sure on that one.
Yeah, and the other part of that is that whoever finishes third is going to take on Western Michigan. Whoever finishes second has Colorado College in the first round of the single-elimination NCHC playoffs. And I know coaches don't want to pick, but right now, if I had to choose between a Western Michigan team that has been inconsistent but explosive at times and Colorado College, I'm going to probably prefer taking on CC as opposed to the Broncos.
Maybe, but, in a single elimination, it's hard to even pick because for one night, one team can get up and play a great game no matter how poor they have been over the course of the season. And listen, CC, we know, has some decent wins and very good efforts in many games on their resume this season. So I look at this as one of those things that you really can't pick right now. It's so difficult to pick who you would want to play. So it's one of those, get to the next round and then just go out and play your best game.
In the WCHA, Alabama Huntsville is at number 17 Bemidji State. Ferris State takes on number 20 Lake Superior. And then in a battle of 2 ranked teams, number 19 Michigan Tech at number 4 Minnesota State. Anything significant that we should be watching for this weekend?
Well, I think, with the WCHA, it's all about teams at this point trying to make their NCAA case. And yes, maybe there's some standings things that we can look at, but it's really about the teams that are not safe. And I would say that both Bowling Green, they're done, and Minnesota State are both safe from the WCHA. But you look at Lake Superior, Michigan Tech, and Bemidji. Right now, Ed, I look at all 3 of these teams. They're battling for their NCAA lives. They're really close to one another. So a win here, a win there this weekend, that can go a long way.
And when we look to Atlantic hockey, they're already at tournament time. Their first round will pare 6 teams down to 3 as they head into the quarterfinal round. Holy Cross is at Sacred Heart, Niagara at Mercyhurst, and Air Force at Bentley. Sacred Heart has had a much better season, although not as good as they've had in the last couple of years. Holy Cross has been struggling. But this one, I'd have to lean that one towards Sacred Heart. Niagara at Mercyhurst, that's going to be a fascinating one. Niagara has had a difficult time, but goaltender Chad Veltri has been hot down the stretch. He got a 4-0 shutout against Canisius to end the season. But Mercyhurst has an explosive offense, a very young team that is going to make waves in Atlantic hockey over the next couple of seasons. Air Force travels to Bentley. It's been a rough year for both of those Falcons. Bentley has had COVID pauses. Air Force has as well. Bentley has been taking way too many penalties. Air Force got a little bit of a spark in its final weekend of play. I would say that one probably is a toss-up as well, but maybe a little bit of an advantage to the visitors, just knowing what Frank Serratori is able to do to motivate teams. But it has been a very, very rough season in Atlantic hockey. They've managed to play the fewest league games and the fewest overall games of any conference on average. And COVID has really been difficult. So who's healthy and who can play with a full lineup may be part of it too.
It could, but you have to look at all of these teams. Atlantic hockey, one thing. It's likely that if you're not a top 1-2 team, then you probably have to win your conference to get into the NCAA tournament. So the slate is clean. Every one of these teams gets to reset, restart. And I think that's really what every one of these coaches is focused on. Health obviously goes a long way, and you hope you have a good lineup in there, but you got to just focus on trying to reset at this point.
Well, there's some great hockey to be had, and then after this weekend, we're right into the playoffs. So catch what you can on streaming video or on the networks. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Game of the Week podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.